Hello, everyone. Before I start the episode, I wanted to give a little bit of a footnote about perhaps the meat of this episode, in which we spoke to Dr. Justin Riddle, who is an assistant professor of psychology and cognitive neuroscientist at FSU. One of Dr. Riddle's myriad research interests is consciousness, and he has a theoretical framework for understanding consciousness, for which he published a manuscript not too long ago called the NOW model, which stands for the Nested Observer Windows model. I wanted to give a little bit of exposition because it is a very radical and new idea that cannot necessarily be easily understood by simply having a background in neuroscience or a background in philosophy. You really just need to read the manuscript and listen to his podcast episode about it, which I linked below. But anyway, so the Now model basically posits that consciousness is a process that's occurring simultaneously on multiple levels, which is a radical idea in itself. But essentially, there are these little subunits, which he refers to as sub-windows, that are basically building an experience for us. We are called the apex window to observe. So the idea is me, the I, the ego, whatever I think is talking to you right now is looking at the creation of a bunch of other sub-processes that still are necessary for a conscious experience to exist. There's these sort of building blocks that are making it, and I'm the one observing it. And importantly, these things, while they're different and they serve different purposes, and you really should, to get into the intricacies of this, tune into the podcast episode, seriously, they cohere and form a coherent picture, which, and in this sense, the model tries to deal with what is called the binding problem in neuroscience. Now, how does our experience come together? Why, if I have sensory neurons in my arm and sensory neurons in my head, and olfactory neurons in my nose, why does that all cohere into one experience? And this is just assumed to be a property that remains relevant in the model. And the physical substrate that Dr. Riddle posits are what's called neural oscillations. And we briefly redefine and discuss these later in the podcast, but just to give you an idea, neural oscillations are basically brain waves. It's basically a cool, nerdy word for brain waves. If you've ever seen electroencephalogram or EEG, where people put electrodes all over your skull and try to measure brain activity, they're recording neural oscillations, and they occur at different frequencies. There are these electrical impulses that can be tracked. They occur at different frequencies with which we characterize them. They can have different amplitudes, all the qualities that waves do. And Dr. Riddle is interested in neural oscillations as a possible target for consciousness, for reasons that you'll have to listen to the episode for. But I believe the meat of what I would like for you to understand before we start the episode is that when we say apex observer window, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about what's in there. We talk about sub-windows. We're talking about the building blocks of your experience. For more depth, again, you should check out the resources I linked below, because there's a lot of nitty-gritty that would be too hard to encompass in this podcast without making it all about that, in which case, why don't you just watch the one on Dr. Riddle's channel? So thank you for tuning in, and I hope this episode is received as much of a banger as I felt like it was recording it.
Welcome back to the second episode of the SAVE podcast, and today we have Dr. Justin Riddle, my lab PI, and Jared with me, of course, as always. And Jared is a undergraduate in neuroscience at the University of Florida, and he is studying dyslexia using EEG. And I am Shyam Dhulashia, and I work as a study coordinator in the Riddle Lab at Florida State University. And I study EEG and neural oscillations in advanced meditators, as well as high order cognition. And I'll let Justin introduce himself.
Hey, pleasure to be here. I'm Justin Riddle, professor at Florida State University in the Department of Psychology. I'm very interested in cognitive control, neural oscillations, the use of brain stimulation to interface with the networks in our brain. But I also have a deep passion and interest for understanding the nature of consciousness. And Shyam and I have been working on this really cool project in advanced meditators. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit if that's what you're interested in talking about. But just really trying to stay true to our passions while interfacing with the academic community as well.
So what are the kinds of projects you do in the Riddle Lab here at FSU?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different avenues of research. Maybe let's say there's 3 of them. So the first avenue is really trying to understand higher order cognition in human beings. So for this, we do a lot of work on working memory, your ability to hold information in mind, cognitive control, how do we pursue our higher goals over our baser instincts. And then in another avenue, I'm interested in psychiatric illness and in particular depression, understanding the neural basis of depression, and trying to get creative about maybe what types of cognition are really altered in depression and various types of psychiatric illness. And then finally, I have a lot of theoretical work on consciousness, really thinking about sort of nested systems within the brain. So kind of a network level of brain activity, more localized regions, and how we sort of interface with the deeper levels of our brain and what that really means for our experience. And to some of those more esoteric ends, Shyam and I have really connected on thinking about multiscalar biology and maybe the avenue through meditation to potentially understand how the brain works and kind of the range of human cognition that is possible.
Yeah, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ongoing projects?
Yeah, so current projects. So we have a lot of basic science which we're working on. So some of these involve working memory. So in particular, we've been really interested in this sort of background activity in the brain. It's called the aperiodic signal, and it sort of permeates the electrical activity that you can record from the brain. And so a lot of people used to just view this as noise, but recently we've started to appreciate that it seems to change with cognition. One interpretation is maybe this just reflects sort of excitatory, inhibitory balance in the brain. But a more interesting interpretation might be that this reflects the multiscalar functioning of the brain, how systems are sort of nested within each other. So for that project, we're using a novel form of electrical brain stimulation to try to change this background activity and see if we can improve human working memory. So that is one project. We have another project that's diving into depression. So this is built off of a few previous studies that I've been working on, looking at how the prefrontal cortex communicates with the motor system in order to support goal-directed behavior. The thinking is that these low-frequency brain rhythms really integrate across a lot of different information modalities, and then by looking at these low frequencies during decision making, we see that there's a lot of kind of distributed engagement across the brain, but then that signal needs to then translate into your motor system to kind of get you to enact your goals. So we've been diving into what's called delta-beta coupling, which is low-frequency prefrontal rhythms coupled to the beta rhythm in the motor system. And for that project, we are giving people with high symptoms of anhedonia within a current major depressive episode, we're giving them a form of brain stimulation that's designed to increase prefrontal motor connection in an effort to try to reduce their symptoms. And Shyam has been running a lot of these sessions with them. And while they're receiving brain stimulation, we're talking about their week, what's going on in your life this week. Are your values, really lining up with your actions? And so we're talking through, how can we kind of align our values better with what we spend our time doing during the day. And the rationale is that if we're increasing prefrontal motor connection, maybe there's some synergy when you're kind of planning out your week to kind of help people, find better alignment there. Maybe I'll skip, maybe I won't go through the full breadth. I think those are like some nice highlights. And then finally, the project that Shyam and I have been really passionate about recently, there's a movement right now in psychiatry that's starting to realize that psychedelic drugs may have this quite profound impact on people's lives. And there's been a number of clinical trials very recently showing that if you take a psychedelic with your therapist in a medical setting, in combination with psychotherapy, we're seeing these kind of breakthrough therapeutic benefits that we have not really seen to this degree with kind of traditional approaches. I mean, granted, traditional approaches are quite effective still, but this kind of opened up this wave of psychedelic research, which we're seeing right now, and it's a very highly saturated space with a lot of professors and universities trying to get in on psychedelic research. And so instead of engaging with, the Drug Enforcement Agency and the FDA and all this like infrastructure to try to do these studies ourselves, which I'm not like completely opposed to doing, but it's just, it's a lot of work, which, maybe we'll do, who knows. But in the meantime, there's kind of a simultaneous movement in advanced meditation where people are starting to, first become interested in these altered, exotic states of consciousness, what the field calls mystical experiences. And so advanced meditators report that they are regularly entering into a lot of these altered states of consciousness that people that are achieving with psychedelics. And so one of the questions here, is when you take a psychedelic, you're incurring some risk, right? Because there's a lot of, risk for psychotic episodes to be spontaneously induced. And then, there's all this infrastructure that's required. However, if you could, in a controlled way, through guided intention, maybe through breath work, maybe through yoga, through some practice, and you could achieve these states, that one should just be interesting scientifically, but then two, it could actually translate into therapy in some sort of more meaningful way. And so, what we've been really talking about and thinking about is, can we convince the scientific community that advanced meditation is powerful? Because there's kind of this idea right now, that like meditation is just calming yourself down and you're just chilled out. But people that are really into meditation are not meditating to get relaxed. They're meditating to explore their own consciousness and to understand why they're here on the planet. You know what I mean? And so I think people in the space understand this, but I don't think the scientific community fully appreciates that, meditation is not a casual hobby. It's like potentially a very intense thing in and of itself, and there's not really any known limitations to what mental states you could achieve through a guided practice. So, for example, we've been collaborating with Matthew Sackett, for one, who's been sort of like a mentor to me throughout this type of research, because he's been doing some work in this space. But we got a chance to kind of drive down our EEG lab to a Airbnb, a meditation retreat center, and actually record kind of baseline and peak experience recordings as these advanced meditators, people who have been meditating for 5 to 40 years. This is like a meditation retreat that people that meditate their whole lives want to go to, because it's meant to be intense and it's meant to reach these sort of like peak experiences that are achievable. And so we're kind of just flies on the wall observing what's happening, because these retreats are happening whether or not we're there. And so it was a really cool chance for Shyam in particular to go there and be there for 3 weeks with these people while they engaged in this practice. And then we recorded a lot of high quality data on them, and we're going to be following this up over the coming winter break in addition. So yeah, I feel like this was a nice pilot experiment to really think about how to study this, these people in these states in like a rigorous way. And now we're going to try to run with it and build something out here. Yeah.
What are some ways that people like myself can, seek altered states of consciousness in our daily life to try to, update our beliefs, get out of bad habits, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I can attempt to comment on this. I'm definitely not a expert in the meditation space. I would almost even defer to Shyam or maybe your own experiences.
Okay.
However, I mean, just what I maybe can say is that, yeah, I feel like we live in a society right now that doesn't really acknowledge human consciousness, the human experience, and we're kind of told that science doesn't allow for hippies and new age kind of ways of thinking. And like a lot of me, making a podcast on quantum consciousness myself, the message here is really, what if your mind is real and we're really here right now and our choices really matter and life is meaningful and we don't really know why? And there's a fundamental mystery that needs to be figured out, And so what I would just maybe give to your audience is that, science is an infantile moment, right now where we've only been doing science proactively for like a couple hundred years on the planet. And so we're kind of sold this narrative that there's this really smart person out there up on a tower that has magical math knowledge that you could never possibly comprehend because you're far too inferior to this super math person out there on the tower. And, when you actually do enter into academia and enter into science, it's just a bunch of people trying their best to figure out what's going on. And so, now that I'm kind of in the tower myself to some degree, I'm trying to pick people up, with us, to join us. Mm-hmm. Where like science should be accessible. You are smart enough. You're not missing anything out there in the way that you're thinking and processing information. So really, I want to just give like a message of empowerment that there's a lot of cool work to be done and nothing is off the table, and we can come up with new paradigms and think through new ways of approaching data or approaching the human experience. And so, yeah, kind of back to your original question about, how can we use meditation to better ourselves? I mean, for me, it's like a philosophical endeavor that I've been going on of like having epiphanies about me and the nature of my life and why I'm here. And, I think through intention and through learning and education, you can really transform your self-conception, and your personality can change, your habits can change, you can develop real skills to offer other people, and it just takes a bit of intention and a bit of, belief in yourself, but also just getting exposed to information that really resonates with you, that'll kind of put you on your own mission. So I think, don't sit idly by, try to engage, try to do stuff, try to learn, try to get out there, meet people, connect, and just create, So I think you guys making a podcast here is an awesome thing to do, and you two will benefit the most from this just by learning about the things that you're presenting to other people, Right. Education is like one of the great ways to learn yourself,
Yeah, I think at the core of meditation is really like the intention to learn about your experience, your own experience, why you're here, your own intuition, per se, or your own life's purpose, learning about the nature of reality, all of these different things, while they're like kind of seemingly out there to a wide variety of people, it's also extremely useful and tangible for also lessening the amount of suffering that you're taking on yourself and that you're putting out into the world, just because of how well it's impacting your mental well-being and your physical well-being. And I think that enough should be or that as it is should be enough to kind of gauge more of a wider audience into meditation, and also exploring the mysteries of life, of the universe, of why we're here. So I think that intention to learn is really like a key aspect of what I want to talk about here. I mean, like in terms of your work and our work in the lab, like cognitive control, having that intentionality to control our own thoughts, perceptions, actions, beliefs into a more positive, like well-being, into just very much a greater way of living for your own mental health and physical health.
Yeah, totally. I think, our brain has all this infrastructure to enact cognitive control, to engage with decision making, to simulate possible realities. And yeah, I think meditation could be a way to really directly, play around with some of those skills and really develop some of those internal skills. Yeah, one type of meditation that I took this course called the Finder's Course by Jeffrey Martin. But anyways, it was kind of like a summer course where you try out all these different meditations, and the one that resonated with me the most was this like group meditation. And the concept is pretty simple. It's like you're sitting with a group of people and you can't prepare a response, but your goal is just say what's happening in your mind as clearly as you can. And then but try not to refer to like sensory experience, Try to just reference your mind itself and just like and it's like an act in like pure meta awareness, but there's this really great, collaborative expression that is formed where you're just gaining insight into what's happening in your mind, and it kind of made me realize that like as a scientist and as someone who's like all about seeking truth, insight-based meditation for me is what resonates the most with my experience, where it's like, like whatever I think my mind is, let me just say it and be real with another person, and let's just riff off of like the core ideas of what our mind is in this moment. And it's just one of these experiences where you come out of that, like blissed out for sure. Like I've gone in there with like a total horrible migraine and then come out of this like floating over the ground, and then also just like epiphanies, and it's like an exercise in humility, and just I think there's so much range of what you can, what we call meditation, and when you really get down to it, like it is kind of a catch-all word that kind of means like engaging intentionally with yourself or with others,
Absolutely.
On another note, I want to talk a little bit more about your work. So what exactly is cognitive control? Is it the same thing as free will? And why should we care about it?
Ooh, interesting idea. So in an effort to study consciousness, you realize that consciousness doesn't mean anything in the context of an experiment, where it's like, okay, someone comes into the lab, okay, be conscious. Okay, it's already happening, right? So then when you want to study the human experience, if they just come in and sit there, that's called resting state. And actually, we do that. So actually, a lot of neuroscience is just people coming in and just like, okay, I'm here. And then you say, okay, we got brain data. And then you realize that if you really want to understand human experience, you have to have them do something with their mind systematically. And then there's a taxonomy of possible things that you can do with your mind. And this is the domain of cognitive neuroscience. So people have already, smart people, just like you guys, right? Just like all of us, have really sat there for days on end and kind of thought, okay, what are all the ways we could have someone move their mind around? And then we can study it systematically, So you have like attention, focusing on this thing versus another thing, working memory, holding information in mind, long-term memory, searching your past, asking someone to hold something in mind or to encode something and then check in on them a day later or a week later or an hour later. And then you have things like cognitive control, right? And cognitive control is a little bit of a blanket term, but in its rawest form, it's basically pursuing your goals, right? And so how we study this in a lab context is oftentimes we have a bunch of rules that you have to keep in mind, and then you have to consider this context to apply this goal versus a different context, you apply a different goal. Cognitive control is, really just how do you kind of manipulate information in various ways using rules and considering context. So it's a little abstract, right? And in fact, we often study abstraction, which is kind of like layers of goals on top of rules, on top of motor actions, and how all of this complexity kind of finds its way into how we are moving our bodies around. So, I think there's a lot of room here for creativity, but basically kind of depends what brain structure you're interested in. So, cognitive control really hits up lateral prefrontal cortex, like right over your temple. And this is, interestingly, the part of the brain that we can deliver brain stimulation to and get a depression treatment response, particularly with anhedonia, like a lack of pleasure. So, there's like kind of this weird interface, right, where it's like we now live in this era where the last 10, 20 years we've been able to deliver brain stimulation and actually have, remission of psychiatric illness. And then we also have various cognitive domains that we've been studying in the laboratory. And we can see there's like activity in these various, brain structures related to these different types of cognition. And so, for me, I think this is just so cool and exciting to see, if someone responds to depression in this brain region and then it's involved in cognitive control, what does this mean for depression and like our, kind of the lived experience of depression or any of these psychiatric illnesses, and then how that's mapping into these like very rigid cognitive tasks, right? Because you have something very big, someone's life. They're not happy about how their life is going, or they're experiencing these like negative thought forms and various types, right? And there's like a taxonomy of mental illness, and there's like a taxonomy of different types of cognition. And I've been really fascinated with maybe we can find some alignment here, And psychiatric illness to me is like almost like the final frontier of psychology, where it's just it just seems so hard to take something so big and then like shove it into the brain, because it feels like that shouldn't be possible. And maybe it isn't, and maybe it's like, we can get treatment effects, and it's like an indirect way to, get into making an impact in their lives. And then simultaneously with meditation, right? Like meditation is kind of trying to tap into the wellness side of the biggest picture of the human experience, in some way. Where there's people out there that claim that they can put themselves in a jhana state where they're like blissed out, right? If we could figure out how to do that in the healthcare system, I mean, that would be, you think that would make an impact.
Right. So the question is like, how do we correlate like this self-directed placement into jhana state, into like a deep meditative state of bliss, and how is that correlated to mental health outcomes and a greater sense of control over one's own life, over their own experience. Is there any similarity in terms of like the brain architecture there, or in terms of like what's going on cognitively, in terms of maybe cognitive control, goal-directed behavior, intention setting even? Yeah.
Definitely. And, one other avenue of my research, which I assume we're going to get to anyways, there's kind of a nice segue here, is that, if we live in a nested biological system where you are like kind of the apex of the body, but you're interfacing with this subpopulation of all your drives and personality types living inside of you, this is like an idea, like a psychological theory-based idea, which might, line up with biology, and I think there's a decent amount of evidence of nested biological structures in biological, in the neuroscience literature. But what that means for your lives is huge, right? Because that kind of changes the way that we talk about ourselves, or we talk about mental health, or we talk about wellness, where you have like a relationship with your brain, And like it's not a given that it's good or bad, or maybe it's just like those words are oversimplifications anyways, where it's like you have a rich inner life of nested substructures inside of you, and you have to learn to live with yourself, And so how much of like meditation is you like building a relationship with your body and with your brain, and your mental experience is, all these thought forms coming into your mind from your brain, and you're not really in control of your own brain. It's like we have this nuanced relationship with ourselves where ideas are being like given to your mind from your brain, and then you say, whoa, I don't like these thoughts. And maybe if it keeps happening, that's some sort of illness that we could classify. And maybe it's not, maybe you like your thoughts, right? You're like, oh wow, I'm like having a good day today. My brain is giving me some great ideas. I'm flowing today. I'm like connecting with other people, and like, or I'm just sitting alone, and I'm having a thoughtful experience with myself. And other times you're sitting alone and you're just like ruminating and like looping on some stuff you don't want to talk about or think about, and it's like, gosh, why am I in this state right now? So I think, an expanded concept of our psychology could really change a lot, and maybe it's as easy as the nested observer window model, which is, my theory with Jonathan Schooler that we've been working on. But yeah, that has the potential to change psychiatry, to change meditation, just like our conception of self. It has implications for neuroscience, and like really looking at the interface of low frequency, big activity, which corresponds with us, being large human beings, and then the smaller, faster activity inside of your brain, which corresponds with all your subpersonalities and all your thought forms that are being developed. And you have an interface. There's like a relationship that you have with these lower systems in your brain. And so maybe psychiatric illness arises from that dynamic, and wellness arises from that dynamic. And if we understood those dynamics, we'd understand, more about psychology and these various health and wellness, topics. So yeah.
So when you bring up me looking down at a bunch of fragmented subpersonalities, I can't help but be reminded with the work of Carl Jung, who much of our audience is familiar with. So do you think what he was getting at with his idea of a collective unconscious is similar to this idea of an apex observer looking at a bunch of subparts of our consciousness?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Jung. I really love the Red Book, for example. A really great read. Highly recommend. So he has the idea of the collective unconscious, but the way he frames it is as something that's transpersonal, that goes beyond the individual, right? So he has this, he provides evidence from his patients that are in states of psychosis, and he basically makes an argument that his patients in their psychotic episodes are seeing, hallucinations and having dreams that include archetypal content. Things that, you go back to the ancient Egyptians, you go back to, the Sumerian tablets, or to, whatever ancient culture, and you find these common archetypes, these common motifs with, pretty detailed imagery. And he says, okay, let's take this person who's, maybe not well educated, has not, gone to that, hasn't engaged deeply in history, right? Isn't reading mythology, and yet they're in a state of psychosis and they're having hallucinations that appear to have the richness and depth of these cultures, of all these archetypal forms coming from various cultures. And so he makes the argument that there must be a substrate out there genuinely for, access to archetypal forms. And so he claims that there's this collective unconsciousness that we're tapping into. And he actually talked with Wolfgang Pauli, who was a physicist that was a contemporary of his. And he thought, maybe quantum entanglement is some way that the collective unconsciousness could be real, that there's some sort of level of physics or some extra dimensional force that's, under the hood of the physical realm that might, be a substrate for greater interconnection between people than we currently have models to really understand. But yeah, it's a good question, right? In the now model, it kind of expands the collective unconsciousness to be an inner collective, It would be a collective subconsciousness or the personal unconsciousness, right? So he has the personal conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious, and I kind of make this a bit of an analogy to Roger Penrose's three-world model, where the personal unconscious is the physical realm, the physical body, the personal consciousness is your mental experience, and then the collective unconscious is Carl Jung's Platonic world. In some way, it's his world of forms, his world of archetypes. So I think the now model is a bit of a fractalization on top of Jung. But I don't view it as inconsistent per se, but yeah. And then Jung also said that the collective unconscious was built out of us all in this kind of poetic way, where he uses the metaphor that each of us is a star in the sky, and the full sky is the collective, and your personal journey is to reach your star, and we're all kind of on a different journey of self-discovery, of self-realization, right? And your path is going to be different from everyone else's, and it's because you have your own mission that you're on. But at the end of your mission is you plug into the collective and you become a part of the constellation that creates the collective. So anyways, but if you fractalize that down into yourself, are we the star to the subconscious inner collective, and they're striving to fulfill the ultimate realization of us, we're almost some sort of demigod figure to the the subconscious beings. I don't know. It's a novel relationship, and what that relationship looks like between a supervisor and a subordinate, right? Is it this kind of workplace metaphor, or is it more of an exalted metaphor of I'm a neuron on a journey of self-discovery, and I'm serving the organism.
I like that.
You know, I don't know what my purpose is, but I think I'm a liver cell. You know, I think I'm here to process toxins for some greater divine purpose. Or maybe that's too reductive. Or I don't know. I think it's a really novel space. You know, and I don't know what the answer is. Like, I mean, I've really been diving into this like the last 10 years or so. But I think it's a rich question, and it's like easy to kind of write it off as like, oh yes, the fractal. Yes, I've heard of fractals. There's another one. But you're in it, you know. Like it's our entire experience is like being in this body, you know. And if we really have nested observer windows inside of us, that is such a non-trivial aspect of our lives. You know, and it's really bizarre.
And do you think it's like the case that these nested observer windows within us that make up our self, like, do they kind of form our belief patterns, our belief models, and contribute to what is intrinsically valuable to us, to our sense of meaning, or to our sense of making an understanding of the world and ourselves?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I realized I never answered your free will question, but yeah, I think they are kind of like tied together. Yeah, I mean, to what degree is the substrate of everything we're experiencing a product of our brains, right? And I think this is kind of the core question here. And it is actually kind of an open debate. And you have a lot of new thinkers in the space, like, you know, Bernardo Kastrup is one I can think of. You know, Michael Levin might be another one. But, you know, to Kastrup, it's like this realm of idealism where ideas are the background of reality. And then we are, you know, your brain is filtering and removing things. And then your experience is, you know, your brain's contribution to your experience is by filtering and removing and kind of, you know, honing. But like fundamentally is experience. Like the domain of experiential reality is core reality. And the brain is like a tool system built on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really fully know. But, yeah, if you were to take the alternative approach, which is, you know, that's one extreme. The other extreme is your brain makes everything, right? And, like, without your brain, you're gone, which, you know, seems defensible to some degree. But, you know, everything you experience has to be built up from nothing and has to be constructed and created. And so, you know, from that view, the Now model is very helpful because you have a bunch of dedicated systems really carefully constructing thought forms for you, you know? And so, yeah, if your belief structure is based on like a series of thoughts occurring and those are created and given to you by subsystems, then yeah, I mean, maybe those thoughts are products that you're not creating. But I really believe in free will. I really believe in intentionality. So at the very least, there's got to be some interaction here. My hunch, as a Platonist, or at least entertaining that Platonism might have a place in our reality, even if it has counter forces that neutralize like universal truth as being the only way to describe reality. I think belief structure is so fundamental to who we are. And you and I have talked about this a lot recently, Shyam, but I think belief is a massively understudied domain of the human experience, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there, particularly when you see people kind of like overcome with mind viruses where there's some sort of like thought form belief structure and they identify with it, and now their entire life warps around some weird belief system that's almost like parasitically like capturing their whole system. To me, this is almost like a Platonic phenomenon, you know, where it's like, if you have a belief structure, and there's a quote by Connor Oberst from Bright Eyes where he says, if you swear that there is no truth and who cares, how come you say it like you're right? So even people who don't think that they have a belief structure, like that whole concept of like atheistic nothing matters, like nihilism, is in itself a belief structure, right? Like you cannot escape belief. Like we all have a belief. And yet we don't like curate our beliefs, or like there's a lot of people in this world that don't believe that they have beliefs, which is, you know, almost like, it's almost like weirdly dishonest or naive in some way. And I think we do need to be very careful about our identity and our belief structures, because there's a potential for mind viruses, and these are almost like diseases of the Platonic realm. It's like evil math, you know, like a math form of poor belief systems that get into you and they take over you and they like change your life, you know. This is extremely speculative, but like, gosh, I feel like belief is just like a whole domain of study that we need to figure out. But yeah, does it come from the nested observer windows, or do we need more than biology to describe beliefs? Where it makes an impact on biology. So there's an avenue of correlation-based approach, right? But like it feels super Platonic to me.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where no one's a Platonist anymore, and like no one believes in Platonism. I don't know, maybe I'm trying to champion Platonism almost to a fault, just to like put it back in the narrative, you know. But then from a perspective of Platonism, where ideas are real, then you could have various ideas, and they could take over your mind and corrupt you or liberate you.
So just for those who don't know, what is the Platonic world?
Yes, okay, so the Platonic world is a reference to Plato's metaphysics, which was basically the idea that it's a realm of ideas. So let's take an example. The easiest example is math. So a square. You know what a square is, I know what a square is, we all know what a square is, you know. 4 sides, equilateral, right angles, that's what a square is. Okay, but do we actually have the same square in mind? If we live in this nihilistic, arbitrary, physical realm where nothing is meaningful intrinsically, then we don't actually communicate about squares even when we talk about squares. I build a model of a square in my mind, you build a model of a square in your mind, and we're trying to like align our internal models, and they're like mostly lining up but not really. Or is there really a realm of squares out there, right? Is math real? That's kind of what it comes down to, right? And it's something people don't think about, you know, typically, something you just kind of take for granted, like, math, right? 2 + 2 = 4. But how in the world is 2 + 2 = 4, right? There's something really mysterious going on that life makes sense and that we can at all communicate, you know? And if we're just a bunch of like random, arbitrary biological creatures smashing models together, it's an utter world of chaos, right? But if you take the Platonist approach, where there's a world of forms, a world of mathematics that is separate from the physical world, because it's non-physical, right? Like, how is a square physical? It's not. It can't be, because we all have the same square in our minds. You know, the Pythagorean theorem can be invented from any culture. If there's an alien species out there, they have the Pythagorean theorem. They call it something else, but they have pi, they have e, they have squares and triangles. You know, it's like this is just math. It has nothing to do with the planet Earth. It's like it's mathematically real. And once again, this is this weird point of like mystery that a lot of people don't embrace with or think about, right? Most people say, "Oh, I'm a physicalist," and you go, "Oh, well, do you believe in like gravity and like, you know, force equals mass times acceleration? Isn't that a law? Aren't the laws of physics like non-physical, right? Like the laws of physics have nothing to do with these electrons came together and they built up a law of physics. No, the laws of physics like are like predate physical reality, or at least co-occur with it. It's not that like electrons smash together and then from those you create the force of gravity, right? So physicists are already Platonists, but if you tell that to them, they get very uncomfortable and like don't like that, because Platonism is supposed to be an archaic like belief structure that we're so much better than nowadays, right? And so a lot of physicalists are actually just Platonists. They don't believe the physical world matters. They just believe in the laws of physics, and then from these basic principles, arbitrary stuff occurs, and then, you know, and then you have a biology here and a biology there, and it's all arbitrary. But then you start talking about perfect squares, and they get uncomfortable again, right? So it's kind of hard to like pin down, in my opinion. It's almost like a societal moment where these are the belief structures that are acceptable in like mainstream academia, which is you're a physicalist and you believe in the laws of physics, but those are like Platonic forces, but you're not into Platonism because Platonism is disproved. So yeah, I don't think it makes sense fundamentally to like hold those opinions simultaneously, but yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
And through the now model, we allow for cognitive dissonance, right? Because you can have all these like conflicting thoughts that like cognitive dissonance is extremely, you know, common and compatible with our biology. So yeah, you know, don't be intimidated out there, people. Like if you have an epiphany or something doesn't make sense to you, like go figure out why. Like, you know, ask those follow-up questions. And if people can't explain to you what they're thinking and why and how, then either they don't understand it or they're like trying to manipulate you, right? Because you have the same capacity of understanding that they have fundamentally, right? There's no such thing as like some person with like infinite super brain powers, you know? We all have a limited working memory capacity, limited attentional capacity. We've only been on the planet, you know, for the length of our lives. So, yeah.
I think that's super empowering. But also, if we're looking at like beliefs from the realm of like Platonism, and the fact that beliefs might permeate our mind and body, like how do we then gain agency over our beliefs and maybe like come to some sort of coherence rather than dissonance over them, and like live meaningfully in purpose and alignment with what's actually going on in our brains, what's showing up in our beliefs, what's actually happening with our sense of self and our surroundings?
Yeah, great question. I think intellectual humility is huge, right? We all think that we're the smartest person on the planet and that we got it all going on, right? We're all the main characters in this show of our lives. And the hardest thing to do is to genuinely admit that you could be wrong about something, and to actually introspect and allow yourself to be fundamentally wrong and to open yourself up to updating your belief systems, you know? So I can count, you know, the times in my life where I genuinely opened up to having a shift in my belief structure, and those were like profound moments. And I don't remember the exact day, but I remember like some nights reading a book, actually questioning reality to my core, and then updating and changing my belief system. And I think it's something you shouldn't do lightly, right? I don't think you should, like, the first book you read, allow yourself to fully update into whatever that manifesto is, because maybe you open yourself up to a mind virus. So, you got to like trust the source of what you're opening yourself up to, but be very critical of what's around you and of your own thoughts, and allow yourself to entertain genuinely new belief structures, right? So I came from like a very Christian upbringing, had like a crisis of faith, swung into like singularity is near, I'm a cyborg, like let's go physical reality, like plug the digital computer into my brain, type of mindset. And then I started like leveled out a little bit, right? And I went through, wow, quantum consciousness is maybe real. Like I dove so far into digital computation and into physicalism that I hit the wall where I hit quantum mechanics. I read all the quantum consciousness I could, dove into that fully. Gödel's incompleteness theorem, go look it up. It's like a pretty big challenge to the digital computer metaphor of the brain, of the mind. And then you're like, okay, what's next, right? And so quantum computers, this whole realm opened up to me, and I like dove all in. And then I kept going. I went very like new age. I went through like a very hyper spirituality phase, in like late undergrad into, middle of grad school. And now I'm kind of like pulled out of that, more super open-minded new age spiritual mindset, and now I feel like I'm like, I don't know. I've stabilized to some degree into whatever I currently am, which maybe is a little harder to like pin down, but yeah, now I view myself as like, I try to be radically empirical. What new data is there? I'll consider it. Radically skeptical, including skeptical of my own belief structures, right? And so you want to remain open-minded but critical. And my advice is like, you will find the floor. There is like a firm foundation out there. And the scariest thing, and I think this is, a novel theory of how psychosis might occur, is when the foundation of your belief structure completely disappears, and then you're just like falling into a rabbit hole, a black pit of there is nothing to support you, belief structure wise. So, a lot of people have walked down this road, right? We're not the first people on the planet. So trust others, learn from other people. And there's so many wise individuals out there that have written books and created media about, what's the point of life. And so actively seek it out, and I think it leads to wellness, because if you're in a state of anxiety or depression, one mechanism for this, which is not substantiated by the mainstream or by current academia, but I think there's some merit to it, is something about belief, Maybe your beliefs about yourself, about the world, about the nature of reality, about why we're here is wrong, right? And if you're in a state of unwellness, maybe your belief structure is partially at fault, at least to some degree. You know what I mean? And in a way, how couldn't it be, right? It kind of has to be. Because, like, pending physical ailments as the source, which I've heard very compelling arguments for that. That's like one of the other major explanation points. It could be a belief structure issue. And the answer is knowledge, right? The answer is education and learning. And, not learning in that, you go to school, engage in your classes, read the textbook to completion, and then say, okay, what's next? What else do you got? What else you got for me, Yeah. And there's this real shift of like, oh, I gotta do class because my parents told me to do it, and I'm learning so I can get a good career and make money. Like, who cares, Like, who cares? Honestly, who cares? Like, I mean, I get life is hard and like money sucks and like yeah, it's hard to like live in our society on some level. But like that's not why education is here. Like you should read a book and you're like pulling out all the knowledge as fast and aggressively as you can to like look it in the face, and you say, okay, there it is, right? And then, okay, what else you got? What does that mean? I don't understand this part, you know? And then, okay, give me some more resources and like get to the bottom of it, because that, you know, if there's anything I've done, it's that. It's like, okay, show me what you got, you know? Okay, digital computers, all right, I'm going to learn how to program. I'm going to read everything I can about what digital computers are. They're no longer mysterious. They're no longer magical. How does AI work? Go figure it out. Linear regression times a billion. Okay, got it, you know? Like, go figure these things out, because if anyone can understand it, you can. Books are meant to be accessible to humans to read. That's like the whole point of them. but there's just like this weird shift of like learning for the sake of learning versus just like going through the motions, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's a path to wellness there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
There's in my undergrad, I studied with a professor, Dr. Erin Westgate, and we talked about psychological richness. And she pretty much helped pioneer that term, which is a second aspect of what constitutes a good life. And typically the good life is comprised as either a happy life filled with comforts and pleasures, and a meaningful life filled with like purpose and giving back to the world and family. Whereas psychological richness was a life comprised of constantly seeking novel experiences, constantly being open to the intention to learning new things. And through that, they found that you can find not only a psychologically rich life, but also a purposeful and happy life through that. So I think that's very, very empowering.
Nice. Yeah, I really dig that. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm still seeking, you know what I mean? And I think as you get older, you gain a lot of mental stability just through life experience, right? There is some culmination of life experience that gives you a firmer foundation. But a trap is not to seek psychological richness, right? Where I think, you know, true fulfillment is having a rich experience. And that's all we got, right?
Yeah.
Is what we're experiencing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so yeah, let's go.
Amazing.
Well, abrupt, but back to the now model a little bit.
Always.
So you talk a lot about how a lot of consciousness researchers seem to exclusively be interested in neurons, but you point out neural oscillations, or brain waves, being an interesting target. So why should we care about neural oscillations, and why might they be interesting in consciousness especially?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, my fascination with neural oscillations comes from a few different places, right? So one place is that the mechanism makes physicalists uncomfortable, because the concept of an oscillation is a bunch of physical things are now synchronized in a moment of time, and the simultaneity of all of these things occurring is what's important, right? And think about our models right now. Most explanations that people find satisfactory are this causes this, and then when that happens, that causes this other thing. But what if I told you all three things are simultaneously like vibrating together? There's something highly unsatisfactory from a physicalist perspective, and something kind of interesting in like a complementary fashion, right? Where one of the challenges of biology and physical reality, period, is how do we integrate information, and how do we combine things meaningfully into one thing, right? And just core mechanism, taking parts and then building them into a whole, is one of the like hallmark challenges of any theory. and partly why I'm obsessed with quantum mechanics is that at the core of quantum mechanics is this idea that you have a wave function guiding a bunch of physical parts. And so it gives you that mechanism of unifying a bunch of subparts into one giant thing. And you get something similar out of neural oscillations, where you have a bunch of neurons, but now we have a big electrical wave, which is generated from the mass activation of many neurons doing their thing. So when they have an electrical potential, it creates like a ripple of electrical potential around physical space around that neuron. And with enough activity from a bunch of neurons, you'll get these mega electrical fluctuations that emerge. And so what's, at the core of neural oscillations is this observation that human cognition has a very strong correlate to macro scale electric field fluctuations in the brain. And more interestingly is that we are big, slow creatures, right? The time scale of our experience is infra slow. Here I am talking and doing things, right? Like, think about your thought pattern. What am I going to do for lunch this afternoon? Like, it's this big, thought pattern that unfolds, right? But neurons are really small and very fast. So they're happening 1,000 times a second, roughly, And yeah, spiking has different frequencies and such, but the duration of an electric potential in a neuron, the time constant is around a millisecond. Beneath that, you have proteins which are activating 1 billion times per second, right? So there's all these time scales occurring within us. And one question is how do you get a big, slow experience coming out of the brain? And the answer might be neural oscillations. So that's kind of the pitch, is that this is the one biological phenomenon in your brain that has a time alignment with your experience. So it seems to one-to-one match your experience in real time. Here I am having a thought. What's changing in my brain when I'm having the thought, right? There's electrical potentials that seem to track with those thoughts. So in a way, this is just kind of the best correlate to our experience. If you zoom into any given neuron, it's not really going to correlate with your thoughts directly. It'll probably be some small component of what you were thinking about correlated with that neuron activating. So it's not saying that it's irrelevant, but it's just saying if you could nest neural activity within electrical activity, it's a way of integrating and building up information into more macro structures. And people will say, yeah, but the oscillation is just a bunch of neurons. So why even talk about the electric oscillation? You should just talk about all the neurons. Okay, but then we shouldn't talk about a neuron, because a neuron is just a sum of a bunch of synapses being activated. So why do we even talk about neurons? What a waste of our time to study neurons. Right? It's making it a little defensive, right? But it's oscillations aren't real. They're just emergent phenomenon. Well, your neuron is not real. It's just an emergent phenomenon. Why can't I make that argument, right? And then beneath the neuron, you got the synapse. Beneath the synapse are a bunch of protein receptors that are receiving ligands or electrically getting activated. So the synapse isn't even real. We got to dive into all these little protein receptors, and guess what? Those receptors aren't even real, because they're just a conglomeration of amino acids. So really we need to know how the beta sheet and the alpha helix and the receptor, how those are interacting, because the protein's just an emergent phenomenon of amino acid, secondary substructures. And then those are all just atoms, right? So then who cares about molecules when you could go study an atom? Molecules are just emergent phenomenon from the atomic scale. And then you just go infinitely small, and then we're just mathematicians or physicists. And then what were we even talking about? Oh yeah, neural oscillations, right? It's you just get so far away from the phenomenon that what are we even doing anymore? But so once again, I think it's one of those tropes of our current society where they say, You know, consciousness equals neurons, and it's just so easy to pick it apart. And then neural oscillations aren't real. So, anyways,
So
it's a well rehearsed rant.
Yeah.
No, I like it, though.
Clearly.
So if neural oscillations are a necessary condition for consciousness, which is something I believe you write in the Now manuscript, as far as I know, it would follow that animals are conscious, but plants are not. Or do you think plants have some analogous electrical oscillation?
Yeah, excellent question. I've also talked to Jonathan about this, Jonathan Schooler, our co-author, and I was even thinking about this the past couple of weeks, coincidentally, but or synchronously. But yeah, I mean, obviously animals are pretty conscious, right? Sharing most of the same infrastructure neurally. A question is, what is going on in plants? It appears that they exhibit macro-scale electrical phenomenon. So there's been some studies. I used to know these people's names a little bit better, but there's a documentary called "The Secret Life of Plants," and they take a plant, and then they murder its plant friend in front of it, and they record electrically from the plant, and the plant's like freaking out as the other plant's getting like ripped to shreds and like macheted, right?
Whoa.
And so it's one of those things where like it appears as if like just straight like polygraph level recordings from like a leaf that like the plant is seeing or feeling the pain of the neighboring plant, right? And then they even went so far, and these are kind of like fringe suppressed like science studies, right? They brought the perpetrator back in the room like the next day, and the plant had like a physiological reaction to the person who killed the plant.
What?
So it appears like, and once again, this is like science from the 70s that was like done probably with minimal funding. But yeah, I mean that one guy, you could totally look up his name.
Is it J.C.
Like,
Bose? I think he did some like really interesting plant electrical activity research.
That doesn't sound familiar, but yeah, I mean, potentially they're also doing stuff in that space. So yeah, I mean, so back to the Now model. Yeah, we've wondered, like, I wonder if there's like there's other arrangements of biology, like having an apex observer isn't necessarily like the way to go. Like maybe mammals and whatever you want to call like moving operating life, we have taken the form of like apex consciousness with subsystems, but maybe other forms of life like trees form more like collective networks. This is like 100% speculation, right? Where like the tree would have a collective, and it's like the organism is a dynamic communication between pieces where there is no apex, you know? So maybe neurons are required to like build apexes, or you know, something about our biology is specifically built to cultivate apex creatures, which is great for like hunting and running away. But if you're a plant, you don't have those evolutionary pressures on you to be in like hunting and prey relationships, you know? So maybe you just naturally form more of like a collective, right? And like mushrooms with the mycelia network, right? It's hard to imagine apexes emerging in mushroom cultures, right? Maybe every mushroom is like a little being, but then they form a mycelial collective or something.
And what if that's the apex? Like the
whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then maybe, I don't know, potentially, or maybe it's just distributed, right? Because what's weird is like, if you build an apex, then if the apex is destroyed, then you have dysfunction, you know? So it might be like a high risk move for life to you know, rely upon an apex. And then if you don't have to, you choose not to, right? And maybe this would be like the big pivot point between plants and animals, is like apex versus collective Now model arrangement, you know?
Interesting.
I don't know. This is first time being spoken out loud, but so who knows? But fun to think about, yeah.
Yeah, when I think about the plants, like the sensing of like the perpetrator, for example, like the only two like possible mechanisms for that type of sensation, that like perception, if you want to call it that, would be like electric fields, or maybe even like some kind of information processing through quantum coherence.
Yeah, it could be something we don't know. I mean, I think there could be like chemical odor, like pheromones that are being detected if you want to go super reductive. But even then, even if it is like pheromone detection, you would still need like a memory bank, you know, and a way to retrieve memories.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and then or it's like some weird reinforcement learning paradigm, right? Like there's kind of always like the more reductive explanation, and then it's like at some point the more reductive explanation becomes unwieldy because it's so complex, and then it's like, okay, let's allow for some quantum biology because because it got a little too wacky to try to build up all the physicalism. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, someone should do that research. I don't think my lab has the bandwidth. We already got too many projects going on.
Well, another thing you discuss at length in the Now model paper is there are a lot of unusual permutations of how consciousness can look. You talk about split brain patients, conjoined twins, and people with DID. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And to expand, my girlfriend on the way here, I made sure to tell her everything about this model, and she was interested in what would near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences like that look like in this framework?
Yeah, good question. That one is definitely very hard. Yeah, we definitely in the paper do not comment on near-death experience or out-of-body experience. Yeah. One goal of the Now model was to make it so that it pulled out a lot of the more kind of anomalous data points from neuroscience and then took them very seriously, right? Dissociative identity disorder makes people so uncomfortable that most clinical psychology programs deny its existence, right? And after the paper came out, I met with someone who had DID who reached out, and I mean, when you talk to someone who has DID, it's so hard to to deny its existence. You know what I mean? The twins with the conjoined brain, and yet they can communicate with their thoughts to each other. How is this explained in like in our modern neuroscience models, you know? And then things like the octopus, where it appears that there's more distributed consciousness. It feels to fit nicely within kind of the now paradigm. Yeah, as far as near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, a very reductive, kind of safe answer. So I'll give you the safe answer, and then I'll give you the fun answer, okay? The safe answer is that you knock out the apex, and a lot of our anesthetics and like sleep could be explained as changing the relationship between the apex and the subwindows. So what if anesthesia, and there's some evidence for this, just knocks out the coupling between the apex observer and the subwindows. So you're still there. You still have an experience, but you're cut off from the body, right? So you're like a floating observer window without a connection to the body. And then from that space, maybe that's where near-death exists and out-of-body exists, right? Where you're out of your body, but you're still in there. And like even anesthesia is not enough to shut down the consciousness apparatus. All they can do is cut off your connection to your body. That would be kind of the safe answer. Another option would be that it actually destroys the apex, and then what does that mean for your consciousness? Who knows? Either you temporarily die, and then you're reignited, and then all you have is like the sub windows were like, wow, I didn't have an apex anymore, and so I look what I was thinking about, and it like gives you all of its thoughts. Like here's all the thoughts that we were having when the apex was dead, and then now all those stories are yours, right? It's like that's still you, right? You're still the sub windows, but then you're like, yeah, I saw a light, but yeah, the light was my apex window, or the apex was gone, the sub window like went and had some anomalous experience. Okay, here's the fun, wacky answer, okay? So in the now model, we stay within what is extremely biologically plausible for the sake of building like a tractable, testable theory that's falsifiable, right? That you could actually go make use of in cognitive neuroscience or in clinical psych or, whatever. But the real wild idea would be, is the apex the top of the hierarchy? Or is it just the top of your hierarchy? And could there be a genuine substrate for the collective consciousness, which would be you are actually just a sub-window within a next level observer window, and the next level observer window would encapsulate like 1,000 people, or all human beings, or a friendship group of 12 people, or what would that look like? Maybe when you form a romantic partnership for enough time, you create to become one genuinely, and you actually form a collective being that now supervenes above both of you and like forms like a genuine conscious. It would almost be like a spirit on some level, because there's no infrastructure, right? So yeah, I mean that's where it gets really speculative, and I'm not even committed to that because it goes a little far beyond biology. But yeah, maybe in a realm of quantum computers and entanglement, if the entanglement web is truly out there, and there's sort of like extra dimensional layers to our experience, then maybe there could be collective conscious beings that we are the sub windows within. And throughout spiritual traditions, these would be like spirit guides, or like, your archangel, your guardian angel, and that, whatever that religious expression of that would be, it would be like you're the sub window within this supervening entity's reality, and they are you and you are them, right? So that gets very esoteric, metaphysical, very new agey, if you will. But yeah, who knows? I mean, I think it takes a lot of hubris to say like this is impossible, right? So we're not writing it out, but we're not writing it up either. And then from that perspective, near-death and out-of-body experience has a higher level to also move around within.
Perhaps drawing on from the now model, how can we strive to live a more meaningful, purposeful, psychologically rich, happy? How can we live a life encompassing all that, especially if I'm in here supervising a bunch of micro personalities, with that fact in mind?
Nice. Yeah, I think my advice would be engage, right? Say yes to opportunities that come around you, and just really try to appreciate and acknowledge your fellow human beings. All too often we write off other people as, oh, I know this person, oh, I don't need to get to know them. But there's so much depth and richness in all of the people that you're surrounded by already. So I think, really engaging in what you have right in front of you. We watch all these movies and stuff, and we're just like disappointed in our lives because we're not, Harry Potter shooting magic spells out. Like, there's so much beauty and amazing people all around you right now, and it's completely wrong to like need to change everything around you. It's like, accept the moment and dive into the moment, and reach out to your fellow human being, and then before you pass judgment on something, engage with some healthy skepticism, to not pass judgment, to try something out for the first time, to think in a different thought pattern that you've never thought, before. And then give yourself grace, because you are in a relationship with yourself and with your own body. And so you need to give yourself grace to make mistakes, to have weaknesses, and just set more like longer term intentions for yourself, and just be patient, work with what you have right now, and just try to engage more with what's around you.
Tell your sub windows you love them.
Yeah, tell your sub windows you love them, right? They're also trying hard, yeah. Tell your fellow apexes to show a sub window love this week.
Good.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this, Justin.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great to be here. I'm really excited to see what you guys make with this podcast, so I'll definitely be watching. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with your audience.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
See ya.
Later.